Hi folks, Mark here again. We're continuing our study of the book of Revelation, and we're in part 4 of my book, 2024 book, The Threshold of Exile. I encourage you to pick up a copy if you get an opportunity. It's a pretty good read, reasonably priced, as well as my book, After the Walls Came Down, was published in 2011. I think you'd also find that an interesting read. It's about Zechariah's visions. I've spent a lot of time looking at and understanding biblical visions and prophecy and symbolic language and things like that, and I found it to be a fascinating aspect of biblical study, one that more Christians, I would hope, would start to get their arms around. So that doesn't mean we don't take things literally. When we encounter literal history, we accept it as literal. Some things are taught symbolically, and so literal events are explained or described sometimes in very symbolic ways. So anyway, all that aside, we are working on Revelation, and of course this is outside of maybe Zechariah and a few others. This is by far the most symbolic book in the Bible, and it's full of biblical imagery and images drawn from the Old Testament, different parts of the Bible. We've gone through the first 10 chapters. I did kind of a summary of the first 10 last time, and this week we're going to be looking at Revelation 11 a little closer, try to unpackage it. It's a very well-packed set of visions, and it's an interesting set of visions because here we are in the middle of the book. There's 22 chapters in Revelation. We are in chapter 11, and chapter 11 concludes, interestingly enough, with a consummation. Heaven's open. There's a resurrection of the dead, and we have all of this that looks like it's the end, and yet we have 12 more chapters, 11 more chapters to cover in the book. And so what this does, I think this feeds into the narrative that I suggested to you early on in the beginning of this study, is back in Genesis 42, we established a precedent that Pharaoh saw a dream 2 different ways, but he saw the same dream twice, and Joseph told him that meant something. And what it meant was that the fact that the Pharaoh had seen it twice, that it was coming from God and it was going to happen shortly. And interestingly enough, we try to apply that a little bit to Revelation, because John, and it's well known that John sees some parallel things in this book of Revelation. So we have the Revelation 1 through 11. We saw Jesus, we see the churches, we see the throne room, we see the judgments beginning to be poured out through as the seals are open. We see the instrument or the agent of those judgments in the Roman Empire in chapters 8 and 9. And in 8 and 9, we see kind of an anatomy of the war effort or the invasion, where the first section is covered in 8, where we see a third of the land being invaded, and that would indicate Vespasian's northern campaign of the region of Galilee. And then in 9, we see things transition over to Titus's invasion, which actually where he surrounds the city and invades it. And of course, we're not given all of the infrastructure of Rome at the time. We're just simply given this sort of snapshots, 2 snapshots of the war effort. But as we go farther on in the second half of Revelation, we're going to see how those that infrastructure of Rome, we get a little bit more, and how that transition from Vespasian's invasion to Titus bringing the conclusion in chapter 9. So as we move on, we'll come to this chapter 11 now, and chapter 11 will be an interesting, really fascinating kind of interlude here. As verses 1 and 2, John is commanded to measure the temple, and then he says that he's told that the outer court and the holy city are given to the nations, who's going to trample them for 42 months, and he's not to measure that outer court. In verses 3 to 6, we see the 2 witnesses are introduced in their prophetic ministry, and the authority is endowed. They're endowed with God's authority to bring drought and plagues. And then in 7 to 10, we see the death of the witnesses as the beast from the abyss kills them, and there's a great celebration over their deaths. And then we see the resurrection of the witnesses, and there's a severe, tremendous earthquake that destroys 1/10 of the city. And then 15 to 19, the 7th trumpet blows, and we hear loud voices proclaiming the establishment of God's kingdom. 24 elders. We see a resurrection of the dead, reward, great judgment, and then we find that the temple in heaven opens, and that is the naos, the sanctuary in heaven opens, revealing the Ark of the Covenant, flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals, thunder, and a great earthquake and hailstorm. So a lot going on in Revelation 11, and I thought what we'd try to do is, rather than give you kind of what I did in the book, was just give you an overview of why I believe this is all first century activity, which may sound insane to some of you. There's an awful lot there that you wonder, well, how was that fulfilled in the first century? But let's go back, and I'm going to kind of give you the end before I go on to the beginning. That back on page 297 in the book, in the Threshold of Exile, I made a point that's been a point of assurance for me, is that we've got to evaluate the evidence in Revelation, in the book itself, that indicates the time and nature of the characters and the events that are going on, okay? And once we've established that, although we may not fully be able to grasp every detail, we can be confident that it must have occurred within the stated time frame given by the Holy Spirit in terms of its time, its history. And so if I've been looking at Revelation, what we've seen so far, we've seen, these events are going to happen shortly. We have existing churches to whom this was written to. It's irrelevant to their time. We see very clear evidences in the chapters 8 and 9 of the Roman Empire's invasion of the city, very clear parallels. So there's a lot here that would suggest that this is all first century. Well, the same thing is true of Revelation 11, regardless of all of these strange things that we're seeing, and maybe some of them we don't really have a clear historical evidence of. Well, newsflash, and I don't mean to be crude or rude about it, but the fact is, if I'm to take a futuristic perspective on these events in Revelation, I'm basing what's going to happen in the future, or they're basing what's going to happen in the future on their interpretation of a text. There's no historical evidence in any way for them to make those particular declarations or interpretations, because they're speculating on what they interpret the text to mean. Okay, so we're not we're on solid ground here when we're saying we're trying to take the text and look at it and say, is this something that must have happened in the first century? And if so, then I can look at the rest of it and say, well, what I don't understand or what I don't have historical evidence for, I can still be confident that it occurred in that time frame. And this is true, as I kind of explained to you as we looked at the beginning of the chapter here in 11:1 and 2, and I kind of did go over this before, but I think it's worth repeating. John's given a measuring rod and instructed to measure. And by the way, this is the reed that he's given. Different translations use different words, but the reed he's given is a pen, and it's for kind of accounting or recording. And the staff that he's given, or the rod, is actually, the word can mean a scepter. That can have it can be used for measurement or assessment. And so we have, in my mind, we have this picture of John being given an instrument that both is going to be for measuring something, recording something, counting something, because these all have much to do with the idea of measurement in the scriptures. They can be used for assessing something for judgment. The word can be used for something, assessing for preservation. It can involve counting. It can be called measuring. It can be weights, dimensions. There's all sorts of different ways, or recording. There's all different ways the idea of measurement can be used. And of course, there's different Greek and Hebrew words used, and we can attack that from us, say, well, this only specifically means this or that. But I don't think so. I think that there's even some insights from A.T. Robinson on this that make some interesting points we'll look at in a moment. But the important point here is that I wanted you to note that John himself is given the instrument to do the measurement. Now, there is nowhere that I know of in the Bible, and I'm open to correction, but I have not found anywhere where a human individual, Ezekiel or John or anyone else or Zechariah, is given something to measure a visionary object. So we looked at, and you can just make a note of this, we looked at it last time, that in Ezekiel 40, Ezekiel sees a structure like a city, and he sees an angel, and he measures. The angel does the measurement. Ezekiel does not make the measurement. And again later on in Revelation 21, John sees the holy city, coming down, the New Jerusalem, and he sees an angel with and the angel measures. John sees, but the angel measures, because John cannot measure a visionary structure, a visionary object. Okay, there's no precedent for that, at least that I have found yet in the scriptures. But an angel can measure a visionary structure, and a human being can measure or assess the physical structure. For that reason, when John is told to measure the temple, the sanctuary, actually the naos, the inner sanctuary is what he's being told to measure, is that he is able to make that assessment. Now, how exactly he did it, we don't know. But he's able to make that assessment because it would have had to been a physical structure, okay? And there's even one more, which is kind of an interesting but odd one. In Zechariah 2, we have almost this combination of physical and spiritual, where an angel is running to measure the physical geography of where Jerusalem ought to be and how large it ought to be, and he's interrupted, and the Lord instructs him that Jerusalem is going to be built without walls, and God's going to be, the true Jerusalem will be one that is not a physical structure. But beyond all that, one thing we don't see, there's no precedent for, is a human being measuring a visionary structure, a structure that does not exist in the physical world. So I'm submitting to you that in order for John to be able to make the measurement or the assessment, it had to be the physical temple. Now, in order to be the physical temple, that temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, which means John would have to have seen that vision and recorded Revelation prior to 70 AD. That's what we call the early date. Now, there are other indications in Revelation that would help us come to that same conclusion. My other concern would be for the futurist perspective. It kind of works. It kind of works just the opposite. It says, well, this was written in 95, therefore this had to have been a visionary city because the temple was already destroyed. And we're taking a premise, what Dr. Ken Gentry called a suppressed premise, and trying to impart something or impose something on the text that it's not explicitly stated. We are told that this is the temple. And we are told of the temple, and John being given to the assessment of it, it must have been a physical temple. Therefore, based on what the scripture says, then we must assume then, as much evidence shows us and tells us, both internal within the Bible and outside of it in early writings and records, that this was seen and recorded prior to 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem. Now we have the basis for looking at Revelation as a historical text describing the conditions in the Roman-Jewish war that were prophesied by Jesus in Matthew 24 when he said all these things will come upon this generation. He described the destruction of Jerusalem. And so we have all this really being set up for us. So the remainder of Revelation 11, we're going to try to unpackage it a little bit, but the remainder of Revelation 11 is difficult from any standpoint to interpret exactly what's going on. But I rest, as I mentioned to you in the book, that I rest in the fact that I'm pretty confident now that this is a pre-70 vision. So whatever we're going to see must have happened. And even though I don't have a historical record, or I can't conclusively say this happened or that happened, the time parameters given to me by the text indicate that, yes, this was going on. And we have to remember, okay, I guess I'm going back to the end again. We have to remember something. Why not the first century? So, again, somebody asked, what proof do you have? We need to understand what's going on in Revelation and what Jesus described in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse, wars, rumors of wars, stars falling from the sky. We are watching the conclusion of 1,500 years of redemptive history. God's calling Israel out of Egypt, established them with the tabernacle under Moses, giving them the law, leading them in to take the promised land. Great miracles, signs, wonders, the building of the temple, the kings, all this great, glorious, the prophetic period, all this great, glorious history that we see. This is all coming down, okay? This is all coming to a conclusion. The Son of God has come and offered himself, staked the cross into the earth as it began to shake and everything began to crumble. And so this time in human history is full of what Jesus called birth pains, great devastation, great tribulation. And there are things that we see from these texts that actually did occur. Earthquakes and storms that were recorded in history. Saints were resurrected when Jesus, Matthew tells us that many saints were seen when Jesus rose from the dead, that were seen in the holy city. Historians have recorded great phenomenon that supposedly, again, this is something that one can agree or not agree or believe or not believe, but there are some historical evidences that some strange phenomena occurred in the temple and in the sky. And even priests in the temple who are not necessarily going to be biased toward any particular Christian religion said that there suddenly was a great light in the temple. These are actually on record as historical records. Now, so as unbelievable as some of this may look, we have to understand that it was a phenomenal time in human history, this period in which the old covenant age was drawing to a close and the new covenant era was giving birth to, as Jerusalem was to fall and the church was going to be released into its freedom to pursue God on the basis of the covenant of grace with no more connection to the old Jewish temple system. So yes, are there crazy, wild things going on? Of course there are. Well, there are crazy, wild things going on in the book of Genesis. Giants and, Noah builds an ark and a flood. And there are times in human history that, we just have to shake our heads and say, you just had to be there. You just had to be there to be able to appreciate what this kind of stuff was all about. All right. So let's not be too quick to write things off just because somebody says, well, when did that happen? Well, my question is, when is that going to happen? We both go back to the scriptures to draw our conclusions. So my assessment that this is history is no less valid than somebody's assessment that this has to be future. I hope you follow that because it's very, very important. So we have in Revelation 11, 1 and 2, we have inclusion, we have exclusion. John has been given this instrument for measuring, recording, counting. We are confident now that this is a physical structure because John, not an angel, is measuring it. The assessment is seen in as the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship. So there's three elements of this now. So it's one thing to say we're going to measure the temple or the naos, assess the temple or the naos. That's something that you could actually measure with a stick or a yardstick or a tape measure or something like that. And but I think what John is trying to give us here, what the Spirit is trying to give us, is throne imagery. This is the naos, the temple. This is not the temple complex at large. John is being told to measure the inner sanctuary. That's the throne room area, okay? And that is a restricted area, historically, that only the priesthood could enter, okay? And so what we're looking at, if we reflect back on Revelation 5, for example, if we reflect back on Revelation 5, we get some insight here to who and what is being measured, and that is in Revelation 5 we're told that We're told that the Lamb is worthy to take the scroll and open its seals. This would be verse 9. And for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God, and from every tribe, language, and people and nation you've made them a kingdom and priests to our God, so they shall reign upon the earth. Now that's interesting because you get both priesthood and kingliness. Interestingly enough, you have these people who are being given access. They're being recorded as having access, but there's also a priestliness. And that word that is translated staff in your Bible actually means or can mean a scepter of royalty. And so we have this imagery of both priestliness and royalty. These are people, this is a company who are marked as kingly and royalty, who have access and who have royalty before God. And so we're seeing priests and we're seeing kings. But also we're seeing those who worship there as a company being measured. Now you can't measure people physically. I mean, he's not telling them to go out and measure. This guy's 6 foot tall. This one's 5'5". He's in Robinson, A.T. Robinson, in his commentary on this verse, sees a connection here. This assessment of this group of people, and he ties it back to Revelation, where we see 144,000. Okay, and then we see this innumerable company. So we see this company, and they're all around the throne. And so what we're seeing, this grand picture is John is being told to make an assessment, make a count, assure that all of this company that is supposed to be preserved during this great time of tribulation, which we're about to see here in a minute, during this great time of conflict and tribulation, that they're preserved, they're counted, they're identified, they're kings, priests, they have access, they are near the throne, okay? And we see them, later we see them in Revelation 8, that there's the bowls of incense going up that are the prayers of the saints that the angels are carrying. So these are people that are at the incense altar, and that incense altar was right at the very entrance to the Holy of Holies. See, so this is all priestly people that are being accounted for. This is a priestly company. And this is very much this whole idea of these people being recorded. I think there's a great text in Isaiah chapter 4, if we can take a look at that real quick. I'd love to just read that to you, because this is reflects a little bit of Isaiah's vision of this separation, the separation between different companies of people in God's house. And he says in chapter 4, verse 2, that he says, "In that day the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel." Now this branch of the Lord, that is a title of the Messiah, okay? And Jesus even said it that way in John 15, "I am the vine, you're the branches." There's this great branch that is now the new branch of the Lord after the old has collapsed, the old vine that has been destroyed, which happens in chapter 5 here. But he says that the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors, those that are left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem. Whoever remains will be called holy, everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem. See, so there's this record that's being kept. And again, John has this pen-like instrument, and he's recording all those who are recorded for life in Jerusalem. But now we have to move to the second half of this, because in verse 2, I hope that was clear enough for you, but in verse 2 we see quite a contrast, because now we're going to see something is excluded. And actually it's very emphatic in the original text. He tells them that do not measure the outer court, because it's given to the Gentiles. So the outer perimeter, the outer area of the court, of the complex, he says, and it's emphatic, do not measure, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and that they have been cast out, much like Paul talks in Revelation. In Galatians chapter 4, that this other group has now been cast out, and they're now among the Gentiles. Okay, now these are not just the Romans. I want to make see something very interesting. We looked at it in Revelation 8, and I want to look at it again. In Revelation 8, give me a moment here, we'll find it for you. In Revelation chapter 8, we found that there was, let's see, that was Revelation 8:8. We saw that the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like the great mountain burning with fire was thrown, literally cast, into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures died, etc., etc. This great mountain, we said, was the jurisdiction of Jerusalem. This great mountain in the land was the jurisdiction of Jerusalem. And what's happened? It's being cast into the sea. What does that mean? The sea is the Gentile nations, okay? And so that which is this casting out, which is what occurs again here in Revelation 11:2, this casting out of those not included in this holy prophetic company in verse 1 that's being measured, assessed, and preserved. These others are being cast out. Where are they being cast out? Well, the mountain has fallen to the sea. They are now among the Gentiles. They are now being immersed into the Gentile nations, okay? They have become Gentiles before God. They are no longer the covenant people. The church has become the covenant people, so they are no longer participants in the covenant, okay? And so we see this interesting parallel also both in Ezra 2 and Nehemiah 7, where they're looking for when the returnees from exile, they're looking for the record of their genealogy to be priests, and they couldn't find it, and so it says that they were cast out. They were cast away from their opportunity as priests because they could not be found in the record. See, so John's doing this kind of Nehemiah, Ezra-like assessment, and there's a separation taking place. And this is a big theme in this whole period from 30 AD to 70 AD as the gospel goes forth to the nations and the new covenant is emerging and the old covenant is passing away, that there is this, we see this separation. We saw it in Matthew 24, especially in Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, this whole idea of this great separation. And again, it is nothing anti-Semitic. It's not that God hates Jews. Please don't read that into this. It's Old Covenant, New Covenant. It's those Jew and Gentile who embraced Christ, who embraced the New Covenant. They are the ones who are measured, preserved. That which clings to the Old Covenant, that which chooses to stay under the old law, is cast out from the purpose of God, okay? But the offer remains for anyone, Jew, Gentile, to accept and receive Christ and enter into that New Covenant relationship. One other interesting parallel in Isaiah chapter 9. This we're told in Revelation 11 that the outer court is going to be trampled by the Gentiles. Well, of course, that's a specific reference, first of all, to Luke 21:24, where we're told Jesus said that the Gentiles would trample over the holy city for 3.5 years, 42 months. And that Israel would be scattered among the nations after the war. Okay, but then also in Isaiah, again in Isaiah chapter 1, I want you to notice that God condemns the fallen nation, the disobedient nation. In verses 9 to 12, we read, "If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we would have been like Sodom, we would have been like Gomorrah. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah. For what to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough burnt offerings and rams and the fat of the well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls and the lambs and goats. When you appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts?" Isn't that interesting? Who has required of you? You are trampling my courts. Do you know that in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the trampling of God's courts is the same language as we see in Revelation, that the courts of God, the outer courts, will be trampled over by who? By Gentiles. So Israel here now, unfortunately, the non-believing Jews in this era, they're seen as having trampled God's courts, there's kind of a double meaning here where you see Israel is trampling God's courts because they're still offering sacrifices there, but Rome is going to come and trample the holy city and the courts of the Lord in the destruction of Jerusalem. So it's kind of a double hit there when you look at it that way, okay? So we have quite an interesting image of separation. I hope that wasn't too much all at once there for you, but I really think that that's an important distinction, and I think it gives us a pretty clear picture of what was happening. This whole era of 30 to 70 AD, this was all about a great separation occurring, okay? This is a separating event. This is not just, I'm sure that during the course of all of history, God does his pruning and cleansing of the church and this and that, but this is a huge, major event here where the destruction of the city and the temple, the distinction between the believing Jew, the believing Gentile, and those who did not believe is very distinct, very clear, and there is this fire being thrown to the land as we were told in Revelation 8. That's the judgment.